Today's guest is an author, speaker, and fitness expert. He wrote a book about one of my absolute favorite concepts, holy shit moment, and we discussed this concept of being inspired and motivated in an instant and how it's often misunderstood. He shares some secrets on writing, lessons he learned from his ADHD, and how to live life in a way that is not soul-sucking. Please welcome to JKL, James Fell. Right on. So this is an interview that I've been really excited for, having read your book, Holy Shit Moment, and really having it be something that has changed my life, at least a little bit already. So I'm excited for this interview. One of the questions, though, that I want to ask right off the bat requires me to read a quote verbatim, because when I was on your website, I read the quote, "Those who cannot remember the past need a history teacher who says fuck a lot." And I thought that that couldn't be a better way of explaining how we need to make learning fun sometimes and just be ourselves. But I don't want to take any words from you. I just would love to hear why that's your caption and how you feel about the idea of swearing.
Well, my father worked his whole life as a carpenter. So I think I came by my potty mouth, honestly, hearing him, invent swear words on the spot as he was building something or whacking his thumb with a hammer. And so, I've always just been a guy that swearing, both my parents, they swore. And at a certain point, they were like, yeah, I guess we can't stop the kids from doing it. And so it was, it's part of our pop culture, a lot of my favorite movies and stuff like that. And favorite authors, like I read Stephen King, and I just thought he was hilarious in his use of profanity. And then, I became a fitness writer first. I started a column in the Los Angeles Times in 2010, and I wrote for them for almost a decade. I think they let me get away with hell twice. So I'm perfectly capable of writing in a funny and engaging manner without swearing. But when I started blogging and started this new history writing project, I just thought, I'm going to just try and use a natural sort of funny, entertaining voice as pure to my own heart as it could possibly be. And when you're reading history, like, there's a lot of terrible shit that human beings have done across the ages. And sometimes it makes you excited. Other times it makes you angry. And so I just kind of wrote what I felt, and quite often what I felt like doing was using profanity.
I appreciate it. I love how Seth Godin, I know, says that there's no such thing as authenticity. The best we can do is get like halfway there, that we don't want people to be truly authentic because there's too many thoughts we just need to keep to ourselves and actions we shouldn't do that pop into our intrusive, impulsive minds.
Controlled authenticity.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it reminds me of controlled chaos. And the reason I was really curious about the idea of profanity in general, well, there's two reasons, and I'll start with one, and it's that when I was teaching elementary school, there was this constant fight with students about whether or not you were allowed to swear, and each of them had very valid reasons as to why they should or why they shouldn't, or it's just a word. And I'm curious, are there stories from your childhood where you remember having to deal with that with authority, or was this a thing where you also had controlled authenticity when you were like really young?
I remember my parents were pretty forgiving because they both swore a lot. And it was just sort of like an understanding that there was certain company that you didn't do it in. Like, don't get into trouble was basically the rule. So if I was, 13 years old and stubbed my toe and went, fuck, my parents didn't care. But if I was swearing in the middle of class and, the principal was calling my parents, then that was different. Or if, there were little kids around, or, grandma was visiting or whatever. It was just, you understood there were times you were allowed to use it and there were times that you weren't. And, I've done hundreds of radio interviews where they're like, you can't swear. And I'm like, Don't worry, I'm not going to swear. It'll be fine. So I am able to turn it on and off based on, although not with 100% success rate around people. Like if I'm sitting in a studio down at, CBC radio or something, I'm usually pretty good. I don't think I've slipped yet. Or if I'm on TV or something like that, I've been pretty good. But occasionally it'll slip out around a kid and you're like, what the fuck is this? Oh shit, sorry. It's like, but yeah, around, I'm not just swearing constantly. There's a time that it's appropriate. And like, this is my book. It has the word shit in the title. You know what you're getting. There's going to be profanity inside it. If that bothers you, then don't buy the book.
For sure. And that slipping out around a kid happened when I had my daughter selling Girl Guide cookies over at my uncle's house just last night. He said that talking about the hockey game or whatever. And then he was like, oh, sorry. As well as a neighbor on the weekend. Oh, sorry. And in both cases, I said, believe me, she's been swearing in context for 6 years and she's 10. So when she was 4, and it's interesting because her parents, like we just don't have the personality of swearing as much. However, I'm very contextual too. So at hockey, I probably swear a lot. When I'm building a fence, I probably swear a lot, etc. And I've come by that a little bit naturally, or like you said, figuring out the certain company you don't around. And so I'm not 100% sure where my daughter heard it. Probably TikTok and YouTube these days. Either way, a spider was coming down our back window, and my wife said to her a few years back, oh, look, a spider. She goes, oh, fuck. And that was the first time that we had heard her at like 6 years old. And then she looked at us, and you could tell there was a moment of
like, ooh, am I in trouble?
You got it. And navigating that for me, teaching the 7th and 8th grade, teaching grade 12, or with my 6-year-old daughter has always been trying to help them understand the idea of a time and a place and kind of situational awareness, I guess. So not that I'm looking for validation, but it sounds like that's the approach you take too.
Yeah. It's like there is a time and a place. And, I think people, when they read a book by the sweary historian, they know what they're getting and it's okay. But, that being said, there are certain pieces I write that don't have any profanity in them. Like there's 366 stories in the book, and some of them have no swearing. Occasionally, it was intentional. It's like, I don't think I should swear in this one. But in most cases, I didn't even realize it until I published it on Facebook, and people said, you didn't swear in this one. And I was like, really? I didn't notice it. And it just, I guess it didn't feel right. So it just, most of them have profanity, but not every single one.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. And I know I've heard you share that with some of the history things or certain heartfelt kind of deeper topics, it's again, in terms of writing, maybe not the right place to share that type of language or what have you. It'd be great to talk about writing a bit. I was excited to come on this episode. I'm excited for all of our guests. I really, really am grateful. Like we have a lot of amazing guests, but sometimes there are people where I'm like, we could almost have a whole show because so much of what we do overlaps. And I was in the personal training industry. I was in the world of fitness. I think I'm the exact same age you were when you had one of your holy shit epiphanies about going into writing. I've always thought about going into writing. Like there's a lot of overlap. And one of those things is that my exact audience, primarily the primary target audience, are youth who really don't fit into school as well. They also are maybe worried about the workplace because they're somewhat entrepreneurial and they know that making minimum wage at Tim Hortons or a grocery store is not something that they want to do.
Oh yeah, it's going to suck the life out of them, I'm sure. So.
Right. And they don't know what to do in order to be able to make money though. And so a lot of times they'll turn to illegal things. And so for whenever I can have conversations that really helps give some ideas and insights about that idea of life design and creating the life that you want in sort of a how-to way, it's pretty helpful to people. To stick with writing for a bit, in terms of being able to write, when there's so much video and it's kind of like a time of TikTok and YouTube and that sort of thing. Um, how do you feel about the importance of writing right now and maybe the viability of it as something that people should or could get into?
I don't really know that it's going anywhere. It's been around for millennia, and it's always held an attraction for our species, I think, because I read a meme once that was both funny and kind of nailed it. And I don't recall exactly what it said, but it was something to the effect of that, reading is basically taking sheets off a tree and scribbling on it and then using it to hallucinate vividly. And there's a certain type of engagement that happens in your brain when you're reading words. Like watching a video is pretty passive. You don't your brain's just not as engaged. And I think that there's more neurons firing because you're looking at these symbols that are totally made up and have created a language that you go through, and it creates what the character looks like and what the character's doing and the scenery and the thoughts and the feelings. And I think that it's able to generate a very unique experience for humans that you don't necessarily get in video. I'm not personally much of a video watcher. I like watching movies and TV, but when I also I'm not really a TikTok or a YouTube type of guy myself. I generally prefer, when it comes to getting information, I like to consume it via reading, and the better written it is, the more entertaining, the more engaging, the better. I'm not looking for just the facts. I'm looking for a good yarn to be spun. I'm looking for opinions and feelings and laughter and all that kind of stuff. And it's also a lot more accessible, where a lot of TV and movies are very heavily produced, and there's all sorts of barriers to entry, whereas just about anybody can write. It's a matter of finding your people in terms of what you want to read.
And in terms of finding your people, you've mentioned the Facebook page. Another person that I interviewed was Parker Palmer. He's probably the only other person who had like a pretty big Facebook following, also an author. And I'm interested in being able to build community around your writing and an audience, because I think that's something that's very transferable for people wanting to get into writing as well. What has been your experience with growing that Facebook to a pretty reasonable following?
It's definitely been a long and difficult haul. And I think it's becoming harder for a couple of reasons. I think Facebook is struggling right now. That I've seen my reach has suffered, not just mine, but a lot of big pages that I follow. I see that they're just not reaching nearly as many people. And I think that that's a company issue, that they're probably throttling reach. Twitter has gone down the shitter, although Twitter never really worked very well for me. For me as a writer, Facebook was really the place, because people are okay. People on Facebook generally are more likely to be readers than on Twitter. Like, Twitter is for the big celebrities and the people that are really good with punchy one-liners. And I was never much of a one-liner kind of guy. I want to spin a yarn. But TikTok, I actually think is really taking off and can be good for writers. You can take part of your story and put it into a video. Just because someone is a big fan of TikTok doesn't mean that they don't like to read. It's another way to build an audience, and it seems to be the one that's growing right now. And it's something that I'm going to start doing more of soon, because Facebook is struggling, like I said. And you can build email lists through platforms like Substack, where you can, build a huge following of free email subscribers, and it doesn't cost you anything. All it will cost is Substack's going to hope that one day you'll start taking paid subscribers. And so if you get a bunch of paid subscribers, well, then Substack's going to take their cut. But, that's a good way to actually, there's a lot of money that can be made as a via paid subscriptions. I do really well on Substack. I do really well with books, but I also do well with Substack. Patreon's another option, any of those types of things. But these days, there is a massive volume of writers out there. And a lot of them are not very good, but there are very good ones that are struggling because you really need to do the work of building an audience. And I would say that some of my ideas on building that audience are a little bit outdated because I started with Facebook way back in 2011. And it took me 9 years to build it up to 80,000 followers. And then in 2020, I switched to writing, did a hard switch to sweary history, publishing new story every single day for 2 years. And in just a couple of years, it went from 80,000 to over 300,000. And so that was, I was hitting something that people wanted. But the timing was good too, because 2020 was just like, it was a fucked up year. and people were doom scrolling and they were worried about COVID and they were worried about the political landscape and things like that. And I was giving this 3-minute funny historical respite every day, and that really helped launch it. But now, like I said, maybe Facebook will bounce back, maybe it won't. But the advice that I would give is that landscape of social media, whatever it is that we want to call it or what it's evolving into, is evolving. And you need to look at different ways to build a public persona. You need to build a fan base in order to sell your work and make a living at it. And I mean, when it comes to making a living as a writer, I've been very, very financially successful. It's way beyond what most writers make. But the thing is, it took 12 years before that started to happen. My number one advice that I give to every aspiring writer is to marry a doctor because that's what I did. I did okay for like a decade or so. And then I took a gamble on writing a book that didn't pan out, and my career was on life support, and it was looking like it was all over. And then I just took a chance on something new, something different, because I had a master's degree in history from decades ago, tried this thing out, and it instantly took off. And I'm like, this is the thing. Not only is it working in terms of people seem to love it and they're willing to pay for it, but it was really more true to my core as to what I wanted to be doing, which I think is a valuable lesson for a lot of creative entrepreneurs. Was I became a fitness writer because of a marketing decision.
Right.
More than anything else, I wanted to be a full-time writer. And, I'd had an MBA, I'd been working in marketing, didn't really like it. It was certainly not my passion. It was a paycheck. And I was looking at ways to become a full-time writer that would allow me to make a living. And fitness was something I was really into, really passionate about, knew a lot about. And I saw an opportunity because most of what I was reading about fitness back in 2008, 2009, I wasn't super excited about it. Like I thought, this isn't very good. So I started writing the fitness content that I wanted to read. And I liked it. I enjoyed it. I did pretty well. I was able to make an okay living at it for a number of years, but I kept having these sort of delusions of grandeur that, yes, I was financially motivated. And I think that to a certain extent, being financially motivated can be important for an entrepreneurial creative person, because if it pays the bills and you've got good income security, you get to keep doing it and you get to take risks and experiment and find out, what it is that you're really meant to be doing. But yes, having a very supportive and well-paid spouse certainly helps in that. If you don't have that, then having another job that, when I first started becoming a fitness writer, it happened because of a very lucky job opportunity that paid well, but was only 20 hours a week. So it was those, I was able to work another 20 or 30 hours a week to kickstart my writing career. And so I did that job for another 2.5 years before I had enough freelancing gigs and other stuff that was making enough money that once that job was done, I didn't have to go get another one. I could just stick with the writing.
I connect a lot to this because I find myself in one of those crossroads where, like, right now I have a pretty good situation in terms of being able to have a steady paycheck, but also pursue the creative act of this podcast and some writing. But it's taken a while to get to this point here. I really appreciate you sharing those early stories, because a lot of people will see your books on the shelf at the stores and they'll see your website and they see the top of the mountaintop in terms of success or money. And a lot of times bringing them back to that day, going back in time, the travel machine, if you will, to when you were wanting to become a writer and things like that can be really helpful to people. Do you remember why you wanted to become a writer so much?
Well, I was diagnosed with ADHD just a couple of years ago, and I'd always struggled in school, got very mediocre grades. And then I went to university and immediately started failing until I took a history course with a very dynamic and engaging professor. The one thing I'd been interested in growing up was reading fantasy novels, and I loved, just getting immersed in those worlds. And now here was an actual, legitimate academic subject that was a lot like those books that I liked reading, just with the swords, but not the sorcery kind of thing. And so very cool. One of the things about people with ADHD is that if they find something they're really keen on that makes the dopamine fire, they can become hyperfixated on it. And that's what happened with me, was that I found out that not only could I enjoy reading about history, but actually writing history papers. My first ones were terrible, but I got better at it. I realized that I'd spent so much time reading that I had learned, interesting ways to turn a phrase. And before long, my history papers were like, my professors were saying, this was like really entertaining to read. I really enjoyed reading your discussion of the Cuban Missile Crisis or whatever. And so that I had wanted to be a history professor, but it was sort of like life got in the way. I decided that I wanted to basically stay with my wife, who was in a family medicine residency, and not go off to do a PhD. So I did a master's in history, and then I needed a job. I wanted to have a family, and it was suggested to me that an MBA was a fast track to a good paycheck. So I did that just because, capitalist hellscape, got to make money, got to live. And I was naturally drawn to marketing because marketing is a type of storytelling, less ethical than what I'm doing now, I think. But yeah, so I did that for a paycheck, but I'd always, I never really liked any of the marketing jobs I had. I was able to tolerate them because it allowed me to be somewhat creative and to write and plan and all that kind of stuff. But it was always there that it felt for a long time from the time I finished my MBA and started working in marketing, it was like, this isn't what I'm meant to be doing. I want to be a writer. And it didn't start to happen until I was 40. And I was 42 by the time it was full time. And then 52 when I was switched to history and really started actually making very good money at it.
Not that everybody, especially in this country, are huge fans of his work, but I know that I've heard Jordan Peterson share that if you're a creative person and you're not making stuff, you're going to die a slow and painful death or something to that effect in terms of the work that you're trying to do.
Yeah. He occasionally makes a good point. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And that's probably one of them. They're extreme points, but again, I can relate to that. And when you bring up ADHD, I've never been to a doctor. I have a lot of maybe comorbidities that would make sense, and maybe I should go ask about something like that. But I suffered from a lot of anxiety, especially as a teenager. I've found a lot of coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
some healthy, some unhealthy, perhaps. But my brothers both really struggled. One was diagnosed with ADHD, and they've both passed away in their early 30s. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
thank you. I appreciate that. They struggled with this battle between creativity and what the, machine and the 9 to 5 tells us we need to do for their whole lives. And so I make an argument, mostly personally, I don't share a lot of this publicly, but that if a lot of this stuff were different for them earlier on, I think things would have been way different because they had so many talents on the right side of the brain. And again, my audience and the youth that I work with have similarly strong connections to this. There's all like creative geniuses. They can't figure out how to do it in society, So,
Well, I don't know how you feel about getting slightly into politics, but I am very much a fan of universal basic income. And I think it would be wonderful to live in a society that, I think it's something that can work. And if people had the financial freedom to explore, then, I think that it would be very good for the mental health of society as a whole. And I am sure there are a lot of fantastic stories and artwork and other types of amazing things out there sitting in the minds of brilliant people that will never be told because they're too exhausted from their job or two jobs that they have to go to in order to pay the rent and feed the kids. And so it's, I hear what you're saying is what I'm saying.
mm-hmm.
I was really lucky. I acknowledge that I've had tremendous privilege, being living in Canada, not having to worry about, things like healthcare costs and, having an affordable, good education, being married to a well-paid spouse has really made this whole career track a lot easier. And so it's, it's not an easy thing. Even with all this privilege that I had to work for a very long time to attain the success that I really wanted. And so I think that it's important for us as a society to provide, a true meritocracy, to give the opportunities to the people that aren't so privileged and, just give them those chances to show the world what they can do, what they're made of.
Yeah, this is, I think, back-to-back episodes that idea of universal basic income had come up. And I need to look this up because it was Chamath or Naval or Yuval or one of the Twitter thread writers that are really popular over the last 5-10 years who I heard share the idea of not basic income, but the idea of having universal basic needs met, which is like a slight difference. But as someone who works in an addiction center, a lot of the days that I go to the 9 to 5, I think of the idea of just giving people money versus can we find a way to have everybody get like a food box every day or, transportation, food, electricity and internet and water and then kind of build, from there. I think it would solve everything. We should start a government. I don't want to get too far away from the ADHD topic, I know you've also shared a little bit about anxiety publicly as well. Some things that you have learned over the years that maybe somebody who's sitting there listening to this wondering if they are struggling with ADHD and how to be a successful creative, what are some strategies or things that you have found have helped you or that you've just learned through your own research?
Medication certainly helped for me. I had to try a few different types before I found one that worked for me. And I also had to find the right way to use it because I think it really is going to depend on the medication and depend on the person. But for me, I found that one of the things about ADHD and creativity, I actually gave a talk, a TEDx talk in Romania last year about this very subject, is that yes, people with ADHD do have a higher tendency toward being creative. And the simple explanation for that is our minds have a tendency to wander all over the fucking map, and they pull all sorts of things from all over the place that we're not necessarily so narrow, straightforward thinkers. And that's one of the things that allows us to tell these cool, meandering, far out stories that we pulled from all sorts of different sources, because our minds are jumping around in that way. And the thing about me was that when I started to really have success with writing history, especially, you know, a lot of financial success, was that my fixation on writing went into overdrive. And one of the reasons for that is research has shown that when you take people with ADHD and people who don't have ADHD, and you put them in a creative endeavor and you associate a reward with it, the people with ADHD are going to work a lot harder to attain that reward than the ones who don't have it. And when I read that research, I was like, holy shit, because that was what was happening to me, because my books originally were self-published. And there was a direct line between how hard I worked at promoting my books and how much money I made. And I could see it day to day, like it was almost operant conditioning, stimulus response type of stuff, that I could come up with this really creative idea to write some ad copy that would pull people in and convince them to buy my book. And I could spend an hour on that. And then I'd post it on Facebook, and I could see quickly how fast it just drove book sales. And I'm like seeing dollar signs, and it became an obsession where, I made a lot of money, but I kind of went fucking crazy at the same time. And so that was where the medication helped, because it became the only thing that I was wanting to do. And my exercise regimen was going to hell. I didn't want to go to the grocery store and cook meals or clean the house or anything. And it was just becoming too obsessive. So I experimented with a couple of different medications, and problem was they kind of nuked my creativity as well. And so I found a great way that personally works for me via some experimentation, is that the vast majority of my writing is done first thing in the morning. That I get up and I jump on my computer right away, and I don't take any medication, and I go on just an absolute writing tear, because I'm in ADHD mode and creative mode, and everything's flowing and everything's working. And then the medication that I take lasts for roughly 8 hours. And so I can, after about, 12 to 1 o'clock, when it's time to start thinking about things like, other housekeeping work jobs that I don't want to do, literal housekeeping, cleaning bathrooms and kitchens and stuff, buying groceries, cooking meals, exercising, that kind of stuff. It allows me to set the writing aside, because when you become obsessive over the work, the medication allows me to stop obsessing and not constantly be pulled back into it, and not have the anxiety over, the fear of missing out. And now it's like, okay, yeah, I could go back to my computer and write something else and make more money and whatever, but these other things have to happen too. And the medication allows me to focus and do those things. But that's just my personal story. I think other people maybe have to figure it out for themselves.
I think that's a great life lesson in and of itself, the idea of figuring it out. And when we were talking a little bit earlier about writing, I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about the skill of it as well. The idea of if you were creating a writer's workshop, and you've mentioned, I don't know if it was pulling on a thread or spinning yarn or spinning thread, but the idea of that storytelling ability that you have that shines through everything, whether it was fitness or history or probably the random Facebook post. What When you write, is it just complete creative writing? Do you have kind of story structure in your head? I know it can be tough for experts to sometimes break things down for beginners, but someone going out there wanting to start their own blog, what are some insights that they would get from your writing?
I would say at the very top of that, the most important advice comes from Stephen King, who I think he's admitted, he wrote a book on writing. I think it was actually called On Writing, but I think in that book he admitted that he didn't really have a clue, except for two things, which is read a lot and write a lot. And I think those are two powerful axioms that cannot be ignored. That my skill as a writer has largely been created on the first half of being a voracious reader. And it's funny that I would look at, some of those old fantasy and science fiction novels that I read again and again growing up, that, there was 4 core authors that I think had the biggest influence on me. And sometimes I'll go and I'll look back, even though I haven't read their book in 10 years, and I'll read it and I'm like, holy shit, like I can see my own writing in this book that I haven't read in years, that I first read when I was 15, and how it influenced me. But it was like it became a hybridization of many, many authors. I didn't try and copy anyone. It was just like all these different guys that they spoke to me so much that I read them again and again, and it just sort of merged into my brain to create this own unique voice. And then you got to practice using that voice, and it's going to suck at first. I look at stuff that I wrote when I was 40. I'm 55 now. I look at stuff I wrote when I was 40. I was like, ooh, that's bad. and so, but I was, I was getting a bit of a late start, I guess, but it's, you got to practice a lot, but, beyond that, there's all sorts of other things that you can do: joining writing groups, seeking feedback, growing a thick skin, and just accepting the fact that you are going to suck. And sucking at something at first is the way to get learning from it and get better and better.
And so when you go, you crack the knuckles first thing in the morning and you sit down, there's no you're not copying a template. Like for you, you're just going and flowing.
Oh yeah, sorry. You I was wondering, I knew that there was another question there that in my rambling ADHD thoughts I forgot to answer. So, it depends. Sometimes there will be a story that will come to me on a bike ride, and I will work it out generally on that ride. And then sometimes I'll email myself just a few notes. It depends. It depends on the length of the piece. In this latest book that just came out on this day in history, shit went down, was the average story is 400 to 500 words. And I don't need a structure for that. I just need to do some research, figure it out. And I sort of, okay, this is what I want to say. And then I just barf it out. But I've also written full-length books that are, that book is 366 different stories. I've written books that are a very long stream of, one of them's right behind you. I can see it, the holy shit moment. That required months and months of research. So I researched that book for 5 months, read countless books, highlighted them, took notes, did tons of interviews. I had over 50,000 words of transcribed interviews, and it took 5 months of doing all that research, and I wrote a 10,000 word outline. But it was in order to keep a lot of the research in order. I needed to plan out the chapters, and I needed to bolster what I was saying. So a lot of it was like, okay, in this section, in chapter 1, you're writing about this, and in reference to back all that up is this journal article, this book, this interview. And so I would just look at it and go, basically doing the nonfiction footnote bibliography, crossing your I's, dotting your T's type of stuff. And then I would go on a tear. But once all the research was done, I wrote the book in 6 weeks.
Wow.
And I'm writing a new history book that is not a collection of essays. It's one big think world history book that I'm working on now. And I am deeply into the research process. You see a pile of history books behind me that some of them I've read, a lot of them are to be read, and there'll be a lot of highlighting and note taking and planning that goes into it. So I think it depends. And with fiction, which I've not delved into, I think can just be spat out. If you're just making it up, if you're in a flow, if you just want to tell a story, you can just tell that story. But it also depends on the type of fiction you're writing. That if it's science fiction, you might want to learn some science that helps make it more realistic. If it's historical fiction, you might need to understand the history of the time period that you're writing about. If it's some type of modern literary analysis that of something that's happening, you may want to plan out, okay, what city does this person live in? What is it about this city? Or, there's lots of novelists that do a ton of research. You think about Tom Clancy, the military fiction author. He knew a ton about espionage and the military and the battle between superpowers and all that kind of stuff. And then he just spun fictional yarns around it. So, but then you could write a fantasy novel that happens in another world or whatever, where absolutely everything is made up. I think it's very individual. Some writers just barf stuff out. Like I think Stephen King, getting back to him, a lot of his stuff was just, pulled out of nowhere. You think about the Dark Tower series, a lot of it took place in not Earth, so he was able to make it up. And then, even a lot of the stuff that he did write about was a part of the world, it all happened in frickin' Maine, usually, because that's where he lived and grew up, I guess. So it was easy for him to just sort of take his own personal experiences. But a friend of mine who's a very well-known award-winning science fiction author, his name's Rob Sawyer. I'm pretty sure it was him who said this. He said, don't necessarily just write what you know. Write what you can learn about. And so that I think is good advice because, especially for young people, what are they, they might not have a lot of experiences yet. And when I decided to become a fitness writer, yeah, I knew quite a bit, but I didn't know it all. I didn't have a degree in kinesiology. I just wanted to write, accessible, interesting stories. So I interviewed experts, I read journal articles, I read books, I learned a lot about fitness. And then I just sort of brought it all together and said, okay, how do I spin this into a good, entertaining story that people are going to want to read? So it doesn't necessarily matter if you can find something that you are even moderately passionate about. There are infinite subjects that anyone can write about that can pay, that can make money. And it's a matter of finding out what they are. I never thought at the age of 40 when I started writing about fitness that I was going to end up as a history writer. I never thought, how could there be money in that? I'm not a professor. Okay, I have a master's degree, but I'm not a history professor. I'm not teaching at a university. How's that going to, it never would have entered my head. But I just saw that there were lots of people making money writing about fitness. I thought I could do it better than most of them. So I wrote the stuff that I wanted to read. And if there's something that people are interested in and they may not consider themselves an expert, but it doesn't mean they can't become one. And they don't need to know everything. They can borrow the credibility of others by interviewing other experts and learning from them, reading their books. They just need to be able to spin it into a good story and engage people and have a good, strong voice that pulls people in. And it could be gardening, it could be pets, it could be the environment, it could be construction. I don't know, like anything that they have a modicum of interest and passion for, they can learn a lot more about and then turn that into stories that can pay. And they don't have to stick with it if they get sick of it. Because I went from fitness to more general self-help to history. And I'm still reinventing myself. I was the on this day guy for 2 full books, but now I'm switching to one big think book. And I'll probably continue to reinvent myself as I go. Will probably write history books that don't have swearing in them. And then I think I'll probably try some historical fiction or even some fantasy novels at some point. I have that financial freedom that I mentioned earlier to take risks and try things. And if it doesn't work out, well, that's fine. I hope it does work out, but
that's the plan.
Yeah, I got bored with writing fitness. And now that I've got this success, I could look back and see how things I could do better, and probably more marketable and make more money. But I'm done with that. Now, fitness for me is just personal. I don't want to write about it ever again.
And that's why I pivoted out of fitness personally, because I wanted it to be set on the section of my life and my daily schedule that is personal. Like, I feel far more motivated to go put in my own exercise versus helping others. And when I'm thinking about it, I want it to be for that purpose, whereas before it was to serve others. Funny thing is, because I had a kinesiology degree and I thought I needed to use it, and so that's what I was doing. But it's interesting that you recapped your journey so far as a writer, because I was literally just about to ask. You said fitness, and then you pivot into the history, and I'm curious. Those are very broad topics. How do you think about the idea of a niche for a writer?
I think it's a combination of, passion, interest, and what you can learn about. Like Rob Sawyer said, don't just follow what you know, but what you can learn about. That when I started with fitness, I knew a fair bit from personal experience, but I didn't know a lot. And I learned a lot in the 10 years as a fitness writer. I learned way, way more. And a lot of that came from interviewing people with PhDs and stuff like that really knew their stuff, and a ton of reading. And so I became more and more respected because I was, and so I had top people in the field that were willing to be interviewed by me because I was writing for the Los Angeles Times and the Chicago Tribune. And so I could have, some of the smartest people in the world on a specific subject that were willing to talk with me and share their knowledge with me, because I was good at, I developed a reputation as being good at communicating their knowledge in a good story. So I think the niche is going to be individual. It should start from a place of interest, though. Like, I was interested in fitness, and I liked writing about it. And then it didn't quite pay off the way that I was hoping that it might. And then the history thing just was an idea that worked out, and I couldn't be happier because it was my original first passion. I had wanted to be a history professor, and it really, for me, the most important thing was the storytelling. That I was good at spinning storytelling into things like fitness and self-help and motivation and stuff like that. But with history, like, that just allows for so much more of a story to come out, that I'll never run out of ideas for things to write about with history. Fitness, I would say, is maybe a little more limiting in that regard. But I feel incredibly lucky that it worked out this way for me, and people can try different things, saying, okay, well, I like this one subject, so I'm going to write about it and see how it goes. Then maybe they'll get bored with it quickly, or maybe it'll grow into something else, or maybe it's you have to be flexible. And in 2020, my writing career was not going so well because I had a self-help book published that didn't work out very well. My publishing career was kind of dead. And this whole history writing thing was on a whim. and I published a couple pieces on my Facebook page, and the second one really took off, and people said, "Oh, you should do like a full year of these and turn them into a book." And I was like, "Hell yeah, you're right. That's what I should do." And that's what I did. So there's do not discount the aspect of luck in any of this and just hitting the right thing. But luck can come from trying, don't put good money after bad and keep trying at something that's obviously not working. There's tenacity and persistence, but there's also evolution.
Yeah, doubling down on your luck, I think, has been a running theme throughout this show that I never really had expected. Guest after guest sharing similar sentiments. One of the things, just to build out that niche piece a bit, is that I know that people struggle with the idea of the specificity versus like a wide range topic. And so I think just with that piece, I feel like it's refreshing. I'm sure people listening too, but maybe some author coaches might argue that you should do the history of Vancouver. I'm being a little facetious now, or the history of Canada, or bodybuilding for females, podcasting versus creator economy. That's the piece that I'd love to hear how your take on is why you choose broader topics like history.
There is definitely merit in the more specific approach. My approach was uniquely accepted because I think that I've been told that I write history books for people that don't read history, and that, I'm not an expert in, my master's degree was in Latin American history. So specifically about, the rebellions that sprung up in the wake of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. But I don't think I would have been successful if I focused on 1960s Latin American rebellions, because it's sort of finite. And I also don't think that a lot of people are interested in learning only that. But what I came up with in terms of specificity or narrow focus is short, punchy stories that happen to be about history. So it allowed me to pick any type of topic, but it was done at my specificity, was doing it in a certain way that was funny, sarcastic, often profane, and short, and in an on this day format. That's another thing that launched the career, was that it was today in history. Every day I published a new one. It was about that specific day. So it was just a different way to look at being specific rather than looking at a time period or a geography. It was a presentation that was specific to me. So yes, you do have to carve out a niche in a certain way, but you can be creative in the way that you create that niche. There are a lot of different options out there, and you are probably not going to figure it out on your first, second, or third try. Maybe you will, but if you find that something's working and you're enjoying it, then you should pursue it. And working doesn't always necessarily mean financially at first, because when I started doing the sweary history thing, I made no money at all for the first 5 months, because I wasn't trying to. I was just trying to build the audience and establish myself as this sweary history guy. And then it wasn't until 5 months in that I decided to launch a Patreon. And that took off really well right away. Actually, it did so well that within 3 months, their competitor Substack offered me a gigantic bribe to switch to their platform, which I did. And I actually like Substack better. I think Substack is more writer friendly than Patreon. So I'm still making very good money off of Substack and also via the books. But yeah, there's a distinct benefit in starting young. I started old, and I feel like, oh geez, man, if I could have just started 10 years earlier or something. But it's, if writing is your passion, or anything creative in your passion, and you're young, you got a lot of time. You're going to have to deal with the capitalist hellscape we've referred to without universal basic income or support or whatever. And you're going to have to probably have a job that you don't necessarily like. But you've got time to try a lot of things, and you've got time to build a following of dedicated people who love and support you. There's an adage in creators called the 1,000 true fans, and you can build up over time 1,000 people who really love what you're doing, and those 1,000 people will pay you $5 a month, and you can make a living off of that. And so but it takes years to build up. Usually, I mean, you got your overnight influencers of, somebody that shakes their booty, or it's just really funny, or, has some sort of unique talent, or maybe they're really good at playing some video game. I don't know. There are the overnight success stories, but I would say that they are rare. I've been a very significant financial success story, but it took a long time and a lot of work and a lot of privilege. I cannot reiterate that enough, of having a very supportive spouse and, having the ability to take those risks and try new things. But youth is a great thing to have, because if you start now, say you're 20, and it may take 20 years, but 40 is not the end of your life. Like, I would love to be 40 again. Being 40 would be awesome. You could be, at the age of 40, have this amazing following of people who love your creative output, and you could be making a ton of money, where it's like, okay, life-sucking job is over. I can support my family or myself and do all these things and travel and have money doing something that I absolutely love. The other thing is that during those 20 years, you are getting better all the time. If you're practicing and you're working at it, you're not just getting better at what you're creating, but just, integrating it into your lifestyle. And yeah, it's going to become a job. Like, this is still, as much as I love what I do, and as much as I feel incredibly lucky, it's still work. You still got to put in the time, and there's days that you don't want to, but you got to do it anyway, that kind of stuff. I don't want to be talking to you right now. I'm promoting my book. I'm kidding. So it's a long haul in most cases. And if you're flexible and persistent and passionate and keep trying, it may take 10 years, it may take 20, but those years are going to pass anyway. And, and you could still be stuck in that job that you really don't feel is meant for you, or you could have built something that eventually takes off. And as long as you don't, that's the other thing, is if you're still working on this sort of passionate dream while you're working the job that pays the bills that you'd rather not necessarily be doing, those types of passion and dreams can just fuel you through the rest of your everyday life. When it's like, I don't want to go to work today, this job sucks. But those are things, that creative outlet is one of the things that can help get you through that.
Idea of man's search for meaning lessons are so powerful when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I know you've mentioned the how-to book that didn't take off. I still am very hopeful that it takes off because of how powerful it is. And there are so many lessons in there that if people were to follow them, we're getting into that kind of life design topic, the things that you're sharing, that idea of designing the life you want and how to do it. And I know naturally we'll have to wrap pretty soon, but I feel like you did so much research and put a lot of personal writing into writing that I would hate to wrap today without at least touching on bullet point, perhaps. Like, one of the things that I do with all our episodes, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on, is a James Fell 7 points to blank or what have you, and like a blog post type thing.
Okay.
And people appreciate those. And so if we did that with the idea of taking holy shit moment and putting it into somewhat of the how to genre, even though it was a small part of your career in the sense of you went, fitness and then after that history, but right jammed.
I still remember a lot of it. It's been 4.5 years since it was published, but yeah, I think that the book was, I'm proud of it. I thought it was a good book, but it wasn't what the market wanted. It was, people want a little more of the rah, you can do it ad nauseum sort of thing. Practical advice doesn't always sell well in self-help, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not bitter. I'm actually very, very grateful that the book didn't sell, because if it had sold really well, then I wouldn't be writing history right now. So I'm actually at the time I was kind of devastated at the book sales, but now it's like, yay. But yeah, to your point, the book is about the power of the life-changing epiphany and how to make one happen. So what's a life-changing epiphany? Well, what it is, it's an overwhelming and incredibly motivating sense of rightness that usually comes in an instant, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not, necessarily God-given or anything. It comes from a lifetime of experience that bounces around in your subconscious and suddenly coalesces in a way that lets you know that this is what I'm meant to do. This is what I have to be. But the thing is that they're generally quite fuzzy. They are, but it provides the motivation to make it more solidified. The first big one I had was I was in my early 20s. I was flunking out of university. I racked up a bunch of credit card debt. I was about to be kicked out of school. And one of the things that worried me the most about that was that I was dating this amazing woman who I've been with for 34 years now. And she was a straight A student. She was going to go to med school. And I had this feeling that if I get kicked out of university, that things probably aren't going to work out. And I was deeply in love. And I just thought, what am I going to do? And the trigger for me was actually just reading a quirky little motivational quote, which seems cheesy, but I read it in the school newspaper. That it was by a famous folk singer named Joan Baez. And the quote read, "Action is the antidote to despair." Not depression, despair. I was in a state of despair because of, the situation I created for myself. And it opened a window in my mind that said that all of these problems are solvable. The debt, flunking out of school, these are things that if I got off my butt and worked, I could fix them. And instantaneously, there was a wave of motivation to get off my butt and fix them. All the problems were still there, but I felt so much better because I knew that I had that, if I took action, that it would fix this state of despair. So instead of like going and racking up more credit card debt at the campus pub, I went to the university registrar's office and begged an appeal for flunking out of school, and set a meeting and went in there and all dressed up in a suit and told them, you don't understand, I've had this life-changing moment. I'm going to be a good student from now on. I promise. They believed me and they gave me another chance. And I was a very good student after that. I started going to class and I stopped spending money uselessly, and I got my credit cards paid off, and it was a slow, long, difficult process, but that's an example of how it was fuzzy. That the fuzzy nature of the goal is take action, work, break the problems down and just work on fixing them. And I did, and it was very life-changing. And then I finished my degree, and it was like, okay, I put on quite a bit of weight while I was in university. This is a new problem to tackle. It made me very good at solving problems. And that was when I ended up getting into fitness. But the thing about it is that in the book is once you know that a life-changing moment is possible, there are tips and tricks that you can utilize in order to make them more likely. And a lot of it just involves learning. Like we've talked about writing a lot, but maybe it's not writing. Maybe it's another creative endeavor. Maybe it's music or painting or who knows. Um, there's a lot of ways to creatively use your innate and developed talents to make a living. I hate the term make a living because it seems like or earn a living because I don't think a living is something that should be earned. I think it's just a natural right that we should have. But that's the society we're in. But the point is that there's a lot of things that you could do that involve thinking about and exploring different ideas, looking at what other people have done. How did this person make themselves successful? How did this person make themselves successful? What do I think about this? And analyzing the absolute shit out of lots of different things and packing your brain with information and then stepping away from it. Because this is one of the most important things in the book that I remember, is that the life-changing moment doesn't come while you're thinking about it. It comes when you're not. Most of my good ideas happened on a bike ride. So I'm out for a bike ride or a run or a walk or whatever, listening to music, and then pow, you just get one of those holy shit moments. And so that's the important thing, is that, you need to research and study, and then you can have these moments that are often great ideas. Sometimes they're more than great ideas. Sometimes they are true life-changing epiphanies. A lot of them revolve around addictions, where there was a lot about addiction in the book that people say, I will never drink again. I will never do drugs again. And they stuck to it because they had an awakening. That it's a true motivational awakening and they didn't have to white knuckle it. The motivation is just built in, where it was like, no, that's done. And because their brain went through a reorganization. And so there can be small, medium, and really, really big ones. And you have to investigate them. And they truly can give you the drive necessary to persevere in this path that you've chosen. And like I said, they're usually fuzzy, but once you get into it, once you've got that initial drive, then the details start to come together.
It's fascinating stuff because, like I shared, I work in an addiction center, and I'll see people, 3, 4, 5 times, or in my personal life, trying to escape the stronghold of addiction, and then something happens that 6th time. I recently interviewed a guy by the name David Dana, who he got up over 400 pounds a few times, and then eventually one time it clicked. He lost a whole bunch of weight, and that's why he became famous, because Arnold Schwarzenegger shared a video of him and stuff like that. And that idea of bottling whatever that is has always fascinated me, and I don't see a lot of writing on the topic. Typically, it's the tortoise version of that tortoise and the hare story. And I know that you shared that in the book. And so to me, it was just really refreshing in terms of a how-to book. And that's why I'll continue to promote it. That's for sure.
The thing about it is that, like, the success generally usually is the tortoise approach, just because it takes a long time to make all that shit happen. But the motivation can come instantly. And, somewhat frequently, I would say it does. That this idea that you get, like, this has changed human society again and again, this phenomenon, where suddenly a person has an awakening and it becomes something that they must do. And then then it's the work of the project that takes years and years. And, but the motivation is always there, and it keeps them going.
Yeah, it's a bit meta for me because it's exactly how I feel about this show. I always ask some rapid fire theme questions, but because the style of this show is to kind of hop all over the place and just have a great conversation, before we do the mic drop moments on these topics, promoting the new book, anything like that, is there anything else that you would hate to wrap without touching on?
I think we've done a pretty good job covering a lot of it, but I think it's the thing I would say is it's a combination of passion and flexibility that you may not know for quite a while what it is that's going to end up being your thing. Just don't lose the passion to search for it.
It's awesome. All right. The first theme question is, it could be off topic or on brand for you, but something that you yourself are learning right now.
Well, I am learning a lot about how religion has changed the face of human society. And I know that we've got some pretty polarized beliefs about people who think it's the greatest thing ever and people who think it's a cancer upon society. And I'm trying to find some nuance about how, maybe it's done some positive and along with some of the negative. When you study history, there's obviously a lot of wars of religion that you study, and it can have a tendency to make you feel rather negative about it. But so I'm learning some interesting things about some positive effects that religion's had on society as a whole.
Fascinating topic. No need to spin off another 3-hour episode here, because that could definitely be
that could go on for a while.
Could be a big topic, maybe in the future. Number 2 is always, if you were to only be able to leave one piece of advice for the next generation, you're passing on words of wisdom from you. What's that one piece of advice that you leave?
Oh, it's so cliche, but I would say that we need to embrace kindness and diversity. That living in a world where everybody's the same and everybody's like you would be really fucking boring. So there is value in learning about other people's points of view and embracing people for their differences and embracing them with kindness.
Considering it's cliche, it feels like a lot of people don't hear it or follow it. It's fascinating. So
I think we need to keep saying it. So.
Yeah, there you go. And then the third one is just to give you the microphone. And if you were to ask me a question that comes to mind, what would be something that you would ask me?
Well, I would ask you that, what do you say to people who are really despondent in a pit of despair, who are really struggling and they're not sure what to do? How do you start that conversation of turning them toward, a brighter path?
Probably very similar to you, and which is why I connect so much with your book as well. But one of the things, I guess, to make sure that I give something a little bit unique is, once basic needs are met, that kind of hierarchy of needs, once the bottom of the pyramid is met, I think that's always step one. If somebody's in acute crisis or really, 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 really struggling, homelessness or whatever, pretty shortly after that, I always try and tell people to start connecting with people who do believe in you, because usually those people feel like they don't have anyone who believes in them, and they feel like maybe they want to be a musician or a painter or something, and they feel like nobody thinks it's possible. And so one of the things that I think is a really sneaky self-help thing is to quickly find that person who does believe in you, and not because you're going to be bugging them every day, all day, but because once you have someone who believes in you, I think it's kind of a game changer. And perhaps the idea of the atomic habits, starting to build small habits in line with what you want. The tricky thing is, to bring this all full circle, is how do we get clarity of what you want in the first place? And this is something that I do a ton of. I've done hundreds of times, just sitting and listening to someone for an hour or two talk about things that interest them, that are passion based, and mind mapping with them to come up with a possibility of what we do want, and at least start working towards it, even though at any given moment we may have to pivot from it. But those are kind of 3 things that come to mind. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I mean, the internet is both a toxic and fantastic resource for people. That, yeah, there's a lot of bad shit on there, but there's a lot of good stuff too that can be found. And popular doesn't always necessarily translate into being good. That there is an endless array of free information that people can find, that they can just hop around and see what resonates and start going down rabbit holes. And it's like I said about with the holy shit moment, that the subconscious coalesces into these fantastic idea and motivating ideas, but it needs something to work with. You need to pack your brain with a wide variety of information. And then one day when you're wool gathering, shower thoughts actually are there's a lot of these happen in the shower. And there's scientific reason for that, because your hands are doing a routine that you're not necessarily, that you're very used to. So you don't have to think about it. You know, you don't have to think, you've done this routine so many times that you don't have to think about it. But it's also warm and comforting. And, you know, the noise of the shower is drowning out other stuff, that you're really in a position where you can let your mind wander. And that's why we have so many good ideas in the shower.
It is interesting. And the other area where this has happened to me personally, and I mentioned it being a bit meta because of this show, I had the idea for the show when I was sitting in a crowd of a few 5,000 people listening to a speaker who was terrible, and it popped in my head, and church was like that. Because I guess the term that people might use quickly is boredom, but it's a great time to have epiphanies.
Yeah, just when your mind is wandering is when the really good ideas come.
For sure. And that's a perfect mic drop moment. I really appreciate you taking the time, an hour out of someone's day when we're all so busy in the creative world. Really, really means a lot.
I appreciate you having me on the show. I really enjoyed it, Justin.
Thank you. And just to make sure that people know where to go to buy your new book or support your work or anything like that.
If you go to jamesfell.com and then just click the books link, you'll find lots of links to buy it there, or pretty much most bookstores in North America should have it on the shelves. So you can just walk into a bookstore and say, hey, on this day in history, shit went down.
Boom. That's a powerful thing to have an awesome personal brand like that. Makes things very simple and straightforward.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Boom. And we're out.
JKL listeners, thank you so much for being here. We are having a blast with these interviews. It would mean the world if you passed the show along to friends or family that you think might also enjoy it. I heard recently from some students of mine that they're starting to enjoy the style of both interviews and solo episodes, which is really my big dream, is to just help spread these messages. So anything you do to pass it along, ratings, reviews, all of that is really appreciated. Thank you to our guest, James. He's a great writer and motivator. Holy Shit Moment was a really awesome book, and it was a great reminder for me in terms of my goals at a time that I really needed it. His latest books are truly incredible too when it comes to learning about history in an entertaining way. Definitely be sure to check out James's work. As always, we love getting your DMs or comments about the show too. If you have any input on guests, topics that we could get into, please don't be shy. Just let us know. Until the next episode, all the best. And remember, just keep learning.